HBO docuseries about one of the most famous murder cases in Austin will premiere at South by Southwest. 4 girls were killed at a yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane in 1991. The building was then set on fire and destroyed the forensic evidence. In the more than 3 decades since, the case has left more questions than answers.
They were just girls. Girls with paper name tags, sore feet, and plans. They worked the late shift at I Can't Believe It's Yoghurt, a little frozen dessert shop tucked into a quiet Austin strip mall that smelled of vanilla syrup and burnt coffee filters. Inside, the glow of the overhead fluorescents made the sticky white counters shine. Outside, the night of December 6, 1991, was unusually cold for Texas. The kind of cold that crept in under the seams of the door and made you want to hurry home and bury yourself in blankets. Jennifer Harbison, 17, was the kind of girl teachers remembered: straight-A student, track star, reliable. Her 15-year-old sister Sarah was younger, but trying hard to follow in Jennifer's footsteps. She was just tagging along that night, waiting for Jennifer to finish her shift. The yogurt shop wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It was bright, public, safe. Somewhere a sister could hang out with her homework until it was time to go. Eliza Thomas, also 17, was Jennifer's co-worker and friend, reserved, a little shy, but sharp. She kept her dark hair pulled tight into a ponytail and often looked like she was thinking about something deeper. She was already dreaming about college, planning her future out piece by piece. And then there was Amy Ayers, 13, a friend of the Harbisons, bubbly and eager, who just wanted to be included. Amy had convinced her mom to let her come out that night. It was supposed to be fun. It was near closing time when customers started to drift away, the white plastic tables emptying out one by one. Somewhere around 10:45 p.m., 2 police officers on patrol spotted smoke rising from the strip mall and called it in. The fire had already taken hold of the yogurt shop's backroom by the time firefighters arrived. Inside, through the haze of chemical smoke and melting plastic, lay a nightmare no one would forget. 4 girls. Bound, burned, stacked on top of each other in the backroom. The fire hadn't hidden the brutality, it had made it worse. The victims had been stripped, gagged, and shot in the head. One of them, Amy Ayers, had survived the first shot and was shot again. The final shot had been fired with a different gun. The small community of Austin was paralyzed. Parents pulled their daughters closer. People stopped going out after dark. The murders seemed without reason, without logic. No robbery. The till only missing a few bills. No drugs. No enemies. No warning. Just 4 bright, beautiful girls extinguished like it meant nothing. And the yogurt shop? A place of innocence. Of pink plastic spoons and birthday balloons. Now a crime scene. Now a symbol of unexplainable evil. Investigators descended. Detectives from the Austin Police Department and the Texas Rangers. Forensics teams combed the scorched remains. Hundreds of interviews were conducted. Tips poured in. Psychics called. People confessed. Theories collided. But nothing stuck. And then came the pressure. Public rage built fast. 4 teenage girls dead, murdered in a strip mall? The media latched on. Parents demanded justice. Politicians whispered about incompetence. The police felt the heat. They needed a win. They needed answers. Years passed. Leads dried. The families mourned in public and screamed in private. But in 1999, 8 years after the crime, a break, or what looked like one. A man named Maurice Pierce was arrested on an unrelated gun charge. During interrogation, his name came up in the yogurt shop case. He cracked. He told detectives that he, along with 3 friends, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellborn, had been involved. That was all it took. The arrest came in a blur. Springsteen and Scott were interrogated for hours. Days. No lawyers. No recordings. At first, just transcripts. Their confessions came slowly, filled with gaps, inconsistencies, even contradictions. But the police had what they wanted: closure. For suspects, 2 confessions. Trials followed. The prosecutors painted the picture: a robbery gone wrong. For teens who'd lost control. They showed the jury horror, grief, and they won. Springsteen was sentenced to death. Scott got life in prison. Forrest Wellborn, still a minor at the time, never stood trial. And Maurice Pierce? Charges were dropped, but it wouldn't last. Years later, the appeals began. Civil rights attorneys tore apart the confessions. They pointed out the lack of physical evidence. No DNA matches, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage. They showed how the suspects had been coerced, isolated, threatened. The stories didn't even match each other. In 2006, Springsteen's death sentence was overturned. Scott's conviction was tossed too. In 2009, DNA testing, using technology that didn't exist at the time of the murders, revealed that male DNA found at the scene didn't match any of the 4 men accused. Austin was shocked again, not just by the failure of justice, but by the reality that the killer or killers might still be out there. Jennifer Harbison's mother, Barbara, had once said, "I'm stuck in 1991. That's where my daughters still are." Every courtroom twist, every forensic update, reopened the wound. The families of Eliza, Sarah, and Amy were no different. They watched the system collapse under the weight of its own desperation, and now, decades later, the yogurt shop sits empty. The sign is gone. The building's been repurposed, repainted, but never forgotten. Anyone old enough to remember still whispers about it. A case that began with fire and ended in shadows. No arrests, no convictions, no peace, but the girls, they remain. Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, Amy, they were just girls, and someone is still keeping their secret. Jennifer Harbison was 17, but she carried herself like she was older. There was something about her, a quiet sense of duty, of capability. She wasn't just a student. She was a state track athlete, a future Texas A&M hopeful, a girl who kept her grades up while holding down a part-time job. Her friends described her as the strong one, the one who picked up the pieces when others fell apart. And that night, she was the shift leader. She had the keys. She was responsible for closing the shop. Her sister, Sarah, 15, had come along just to wait. It was a Friday night. She didn't want to be home alone. And besides, she and Jennifer were close. Not in the polite, tolerating siblings way, but in the real way. They shared clothes, secrets, inside jokes. Sarah had a dry sense of humor and an easy smile. That night, she sat near the back of the store, flipping through a notebook, munching on leftover yogurt, the sound of machines humming around her. Eliza Thomas, Jennifer's coworker and friend, was quiet but had fire under the surface. 17 as well, she had plans: college, career, independence. She didn't do drama. She didn't care for parties. Her shift that night had started at 5. She was tired, ready to go home, but loyal to Jennifer. They were a good team. Clean, quick, efficient. She liked order, and Jennifer respected that. Amy Ayers was the youngest, only 13. She had begged her mother to let her go out that night. It wasn't every day you got to hang out with older girls, especially at a place as cool as the yogurt shop. Her mom finally agreed, but made her promise to be home by 10:30. Amy was bubbly, curious, and obsessed with horses. She talked fast and laughed easily. To her, that night was freedom, a chance to feel a little more grown-up. The 4 of them were inside the store just past closing time. The neon, open sign had already been turned off. The door was locked. They were cleaning. One mopped, another emptied the cash drawer, another counted the register. The overhead lights were still on, bright, sterile, humming at approximately 10:42 p.m. A couple walked past the shop and noted it looked closed. A few minutes later, they heard what sounded like popping noises, maybe firecrackers. They didn't report at 11:47 p.m. A police cruiser driving past noticed smoke coming from the strip mall. When the fire department arrived at 11:50, the flames had already begun tearing through the rear of the store. The blaze was fast, low, and intensely hot, deliberately set. The firefighters were able to extinguish it within minutes, but as they entered the back room, what they found brought everything to a halt point: 4 female bodies. Naked, bound with clothing and what looked like the girls' own underwear. Positioned together, some stacked. All had been gagged. 3 had been shot in the head. The 4th, Amy Ayers, had 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head, one to the base of her neck. Later, it would be revealed she may have still been alive. When the fire was lit, she had burn marks the others didn't. The smoke was thick with the scent of accelerant, lighter fluid, most likely. Someone had poured it around the bodies, on the floor, on the shelves, and lit the match. The point was clear: burn away the evidence. The scene was chaotic but clinical. Homicide detectives, forensics, the fire marshal, all swarmed the shop. Yellow tape sealed the area. Photographs were taken in silence. Officers whispered. No one could stomach what had happened. One veteran detective reportedly walked out and vomited in the bushes. At first, robbery seemed likely. The till was partially emptied, but only around $540 was missing. Nothing else was taken. No jewelry, no car keys, no major damage beyond the fire. It didn't make sense. Why kill 4 girls, brutalize them? For that, the Austin Police Department launched one of the largest investigations in Texas history. More than 15,000 tips came in during the first year. Door-to-door interviews were conducted. Truck stops, strip clubs, mental health facilities. Every corner of the underworld was questioned. The FBI was brought in. A reward fund grew to $125,000. Still, there were no arrests, no usable fingerprints, no security cameras, no DNA matches. Then came the confessions that in 1999, nearly 8 years later, Maurice Pierce was arrested on an unrelated gun charge. While in custody, he told investigators that he and 3 friends had been involved in the yogurt shop murders. That was all the Austin PD needed. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were brought in and interrogated. Both were subjected to long, unrecorded interviews. Eventually, each confessed, but not in front of a lawyer, and with startling inconsistencies. Springsteen claimed to have raped one of the girls. Scott said he held a gun. Neither could describe details that matched crime scene evidence, but the pressure to solve the case had returned. Public outrage was growing again. The victims' families were desperate. The city had waited too long. Something had to give. Prosecutors charged them anyway. Springsteen went to trial first. The confession was the heart of the case. No physical evidence tied him to the scene, not a single fingerprint or DNA match. But his words, extracted after hours of questioning, were enough. The jury convicted him of capital murder and sentenced him to death. Michael Scott's trial followed. Again, no physical evidence, just his confession and Springsteen's. He was sentenced to life in prison. The 2 other suspects, Maurice Pierce and Forrest Wellborn, never stood trial. Charges against Pierce were dropped for lack of evidence. Wellborn, a minor at the time of the murders, was let go. The families of the victims, after nearly a decade of grief, finally believed justice had been served. But it wasn't over. In 2006, Robert Springsteen's conviction was overturned on appeal. The court ruled that his confession had been improperly used during Michael Scott's trial, violating Scott's Sixth Amendment rights. Soon after, Scott's conviction was thrown out too. Then came the final blow. In 2008, DNA testing, performed on vaginal swabs and other evidence collected from the crime scene, revealed male DNA that did not match any of the 4 men accused. It didn't match Springsteen. It didn't match Scott. It didn't match Pierce. It didn't match Wellborn. In fact, it didn't match anyone in law enforcement databases. The case collapsed. The Travis County District Attorney was forced to drop all charges. The accused were released. The state issued an apology, but no one else was arrested. The DNA remained unidentified. The girls' families, who had waited 17 years, were back at square one. Jennifer and Sarah's mother, Barbara, gave a statement outside the courthouse. She looked older now. Her voice shook. They said we had closure, but what they really gave us was silence. Eliza's father, Tommy Thomas, refused to accept that no one would pay. Someone did this, he said. They're still walking around. The yogurt shop was torn down shortly after. A nail salon moved into the space next door. New paint, new lights. But for those who remembered, that corner of Austin would never be the same. In the years that followed, documentaries were made. Podcasts examined the evidence. Reddit threads buzzed with theories. Was it a cult? A stranger? An ex-boyfriend? A serial killer passing through town? No answers came. The families hold on to boxes of press clippings, case files, photos. Each anniversary is a gut punch. Each new forensic breakthrough, touch DNA, genealogy matching, brings hope, only to vanish again. They still wait. They still call detectives. They still set up memorials, and someone out there still knows. The cracks in the investigation weren't obvious at first. In the early days, it looked like the Austin Police Department had thrown everything they had at the case. Dozens of officers assigned. The FBI called in, forensic labs on standby. But as time passed, it became clearer that something was wrong underneath it all. Leads were being lost. Evidence was mishandled. And most crucially, tunnel vision had set in point one of the earliest signs came from how they treated the crime scene. The fire had destroyed much, but not everything. There were cigarette butts near the rear entrance, footprints in the ash, and a partial palm print on a backroom door. But that palm print was never matched to any suspect, and it was never publicly identified. That evidence, like so much else, simply faded into silence. Detectives also failed to fully secure the scene after the fire was extinguished. Officers walked through without proper protective gear. Evidence markers were moved. The crime scene log was incomplete. No clear record of who entered when. In a crime involving multiple rape murders, every detail mattered. But too much was lost in the smoke and heat of those early hours. And then came the questioning. Maurice Pierce, the initial suspect, had a reputation in his neighborhood for reckless behavior, but nothing close to murder. When police interrogated him in 1999 about the yogurt shop, it was clear they were fishing, but Pierce gave them names anyway: Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen. Scott was picked up and brought in. He was not read his rights properly. He was held for over 20 hours, denied a lawyer, and aggressively questioned. The videotaped portion of the interrogation, which would be shown in court years later, was haunting. In it, Scott curls into himself, cradling his own arms, rocking back and forth as detectives pressure him to remember details he doesn't seem to know. "Just imagine it," one detective said. "Close your eyes and just imagine being there." And he did. That was the moment Scott confessed, not from memory, but from exhaustion. He said he saw Springsteen rape one of the girls, that he held a gun, that he was afraid. The problem? His story changed multiple times. Key facts didn't match the crime scene. At one point, Scott said all 4 girls had been shot in the head, but one, Amy Ayers, had 2 gunshot wounds, one from a different gun. When asked about this, he simply said, "Maybe I forgot." Springsteen's confession was even more bizarre. He claimed he had raped one of the girls, but the DNA collected from the scene, once finally tested years later, was not his. The prosecution pushed forward anyway, arguing that perhaps a 5th, unknown assailant had been involved. But that theory never stuck. The media played a powerful role. Headlines ran daily. Yogurt killers caught. Confessions rock city. Justice for the girls. Public opinion was swift and emotional. By the time trials began, most people believed the suspects were guilty. The sheer horror of the crime had closed minds before evidence could open them. In court, the prosecution had little to offer besides the confessions. There were no fingerprints, no hair fibers, no eyewitnesses. The gun used in the murders was never recovered. But the confessions, shaky as they were, carried weight. Jurors were shown video clips of Scott sobbing. Springsteen's words were read aloud. It was enough. What the jury didn't see was how exhausted and frightened the young men were, or that they had been told they would go to hell if they didn't confess, or that details had been suggested by investigators. Years later, the Innocence Project and civil rights groups began pulling the case apart. They pointed out how the detectives had violated protocol, how psychological coercion had been used. They exposed the fact that false confessions were far more common than most people believed, especially among young men under stress, in isolation, and desperate to get out of the room. In fact, by the early 2000s, multiple confessions in other U.S. cases had already been proven false by DNA. And now, Austin had joined that list. The new district attorney in Travis County, Rosemary Lemberg, took over the case after the original DA stepped down. She ordered all remaining evidence to be retested with modern DNA techniques. When the unknown male DNA was confirmed, and confirmed again, she had no choice but to drop the charges against Scott and Springsteen. But that didn't mean anyone new was arrested, because the DNA didn't match anyone in national databases. And because the original crime scene had been compromised, investigators were once again left with almost nothing. And yet, suspicion didn't die. Some pointed fingers back at Maurice Pierce, the man who'd first named the others. But there was no evidence. And then, in 2010, he was shot and killed by police during a separate incident after stabbing an officer during a traffic stop. Others looked into alternative suspects, drifters, known sex offenders, even a possible serial killer who was passing through Texas at the time. One name that kept surfacing was Kenneth McDuff, a notorious murderer who'd been released from prison on parole in the late 80s and killed again afterward. But he was never tied to the scene. No DNA match. No timeline connection. There was also talk of ritualistic elements, the stacking of the bodies, the bindings, the fire. Some wondered if it had been a planned sexual assault, covered by arson. Others whispered of satanic cults, echoes of the satanic panic still lingering in early 90s America. But the investigators kept circling back to one undeniable truth. The DNA didn't match any of the confessed suspects. And until that match was made, the case could not move forward. Meanwhile, the girls' families tried to survive the grief that never softened. Amy Ayers' mother stopped celebrating holidays. Her father retired early and refused to speak to the media again. Jennifer and Sarah's parents built a memorial near their home, a stone bench beneath a blooming tree. But Barbara Harbison stopped going after a few years. It made me feel like they were really gone, she said. Eliza Thomas's brother dropped out of college for a time, too overcome with the loss. He described seeing her face in crowds, hearing her laugh in dreams. They all had that in common. The phantom pain, birthdays, anniversaries, newspaper articles, false leads, court reversals. Year after year, the crime played on a loop with no resolution. In 2016, an anonymous tip came into the Austin Cold Case Unit. A woman claimed that her boyfriend at the time had confessed to being involved in a yogurt shop crime. She gave his name. He had a criminal record. He'd been in the area. The police followed up, took DNA. It wasn't a match. The cycle repeated. New DNA technologies emerged, touch DNA, phenotyping, genealogy tracing. And still, the profile remained unmatched. A crime this brutal, this deliberate, this personal, and no one has ever been held accountable. That's the part that haunts the families most. In the years that followed the collapse of the prosecution, the case of the yogurt shop murders became more than a local tragedy. It became a symbol, a cautionary tale whispered in law schools, a case study in investigative failure. And for Austin, it remained a wound that never quite healed. But for the families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, it was more personal than that. They hadn't just lost daughters, they had lost faith. In the system, in the people sworn to protect, in the idea that justice would prevail if you just waited long enough. Barbara Harbison, the mother of Jennifer and Sarah, rarely did interviews anymore. But once, on the 20th anniversary of the murders, she broke her silence. People think, time heals, she said, but time just teaches you how to function with the ache. You go to bed thinking about them. You wake up in the dark and reach for a voice you'll never hear again. Tommy Thomas, Eliza's father, had kept every letter, every news clipping, every police record he could get his hands on. In his garage were boxes labeled truth, evidence, and still waiting. He admitted he sometimes drove past the site of the old yogurt shop late at night. I still picture the lights on, he said. I still think maybe this time, I'll see them coming out the door, laughing, heading to their cars. The Ayers family moved out of Austin. Amy's room remained untouched for years, a pink bedspread, horse posters, her brush still sitting on the dresser. Her mother once described Amy as the joy in the middle of the storm. They didn't hold annual memorials anymore. They grieved in private. But for all that silence, the case never truly went cold. A new generation of detectives took over the cold case unit at Austin PD. In 2017, a team led by Detective Matt Greer re-examined every shred of evidence. They brought in new forensic analysts. They re-interviewed witnesses. They reached out to genealogical databases, hoping to trace the unknown male DNA through family trees. They even tried forensic phenotyping, building a likely physical profile of the unknown man based on his DNA. Likely Caucasian, dark hair, possibly from the American South. The detectives also examined the possibility of an inside job, that perhaps the killer had been someone who knew the store layout, knew when the girls would be alone, and used that knowledge to strike. Former employees were interviewed again. Old managers, delivery workers, some names recirculated. Men who had been suspects early on but never charged. One was a teenage boy who had dated one of the girls briefly. Another was a man who had been spotted loitering near the strip mall weeks before the murder. But none could be tied to the DNA. None could be placed at the scene. The fire had done its work. It had burned away not just the flesh and clothing, but But time itself, the public, too, had shifted. True crime podcasts featured the case. One episode on criminal drew national attention. YouTube videos titled, "What Really Happened in the Yogurt Shop?" racked up millions of views. Reddit exploded with theories, some plausible, others deeply conspiratorial. Was it a serial killer passing through town? A jealous ex-boyfriend? A group of men high on drugs and adrenaline? Was it a hate crime? Or was it something even more random? A convergence of horror and opportunity? One haunting theory suggested the killer had worked with one of the girls, maybe for just a few days, maybe long enough to know the closing routine. He could have watched them through the windows that night, waited for the last customer to leave, entered with a smile, maybe even a joke, and then unleashed hell. If that theory is true, it would explain how the killers gained control so quickly, why there were no signs of struggle in the front of the store, why no one called 911. The truth is, it could have been anyone. A teacher, a gas station clerk, a local, a stranger. That's what haunts the city of Austin to this day. The idea that whoever did this may have walked past you in HEB, sat beside you on the bus, taught your child, pumped your gas, and yet, he has never spoken. On the 30th anniversary of the murders, a candlelight vigil was held at the spot where the yogurt shop once stood. The strip mall had been remodeled. The tenant was now a phone repair shop. But on that night, the sidewalk in front of the old address was crowded with parents, siblings, classmates, and strangers holding flickering candles and paper cups. They read the girls' names aloud: Jennifer Harbison, the leader, the protector; Sarah Harbison, the dreamer, the younger sister; Eliza Thomas, the thinker, the loyal one; Amy Ayers, the bright light, the baby of the group. The mayor gave a brief statement. "This case is not closed," he said, "and these girls will not be forgotten." Then the crowd fell silent. The wind picked up slightly. Candles bent under the breeze. For a moment, all of Austin seemed to pause, and somewhere out there, perhaps, even watching, is the person or people who know exactly what happened in that back room, what was said, who begged, who pulled the trigger, who lit the fire, who walked away. That silence, the one that still exists after all these years, is not peace. It is the sound of a secret still alive, a secret that has slept for decades beneath the ashes of a yogurt shop in Texas. And until that secret speaks, the girls will wait.